What's up guys, Agent here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Magicka Warden. So the Magicka Warden is my favorite DPS class to play, although it is definitely not one of the strongest DPS classes to play. Right now in Elsweyr, the only Magicka spec that's going to be hitting lower than the Magicka Warden is going to be the Magicka Necromancer. All the other Magic DPS in the game right now, including the Magicka DK, are hitting higher than what the Magicka Warden is able to hit. That being said, though, Magicka Wardens do have a sort of very small niche that they can fill, which is the fact that they can play at range and still provide major slayer to the group, versus a spec like a Magicka Templar or a Magicka Nightblade needs to be within melee range to use their low-cost ultimate. So Magdens kind of have a place there, but overall their lower DPS doesn't really make them all too desirable at the very high ends of PvE play. That being said, I find it to be very enjoyable to play, and it's still quite capable of pulling the level of DPS required to do pretty much any piece of content in the game. So, just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, basically everything you need to know to recreate this build yourself. I'll be going over a couple of gear substitution options for you guys, in case you don't have access to certain expansions or DLCs, as well as a couple of options for more AoE focused DPS compared to pure single target DPS as well. And then we'll go over, kind of explain the rotation for a Magicka Warden, because it is one of the more complex rotations in the game, using a 6 million dummy. And then we'll finish things off with the 21 million dummy Parse, so you guys can get an idea of what the full rotation will look like, as well as get a point of comparison to the other Magicka DPS in the game right now. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So this is only one potential setup here in terms of gear, and this particular setup is actually built around maximizing single target DPS in a stack and burn fight. So in more mobile fights, or in fights where you might need some additional cleave, you might need to swap some sets out, and I will be touching upon what these sets will be in a few minutes here. Starting off first with our monster helm. So again, this is a stack and burn fight, so it's assuming that you're able to be basically within the melee range of the boss, so that way you can activate Zaan. Zaan is still the strongest monster helm set in the game for Magicka DPS, assuming that you can get it to proc. There are a couple of other monster helm sets that you're going to want to have on hand. We'll be going over those in a few minutes here, but Zaan is definitely one of the strongest sets if you're able to use it. Our body set is going to be perfect. Siroria, still the best set for stack and burn fights, which is actually roughly, I'd say, between 70 to 80% of the fights in the game in PvE. So pretty strong. The perfect version gives you that additional max magicka bonus on the 5-piece that is not present in the non-perfect version of Siroria. That's just a normal Siroria version here. Now, I've already done the videos kind of showcasing why Siroria, perfect Siroria I should say, is still a very strong set. Basically, if you're able to average around 5 to 6 stacks, perfect Siroria actually ends up being as strong as, if not a little bit stronger than, some sets like Burning Spellweave and potentially even Mother's Sorrow. But if you're not able to maintain very high stacks of Siroria, then it does end up kind of losing a lot of its potential. And if you have the non-perfect version, the amount of stacks you need actually doubles up to around 11 to 12 rather than 5 to 6. So the non-perfect version, not very strong in more mobile fights. The perfect version is still viable in mobile fights, but you do need to kind of pay a little bit more attention to your stacks, so it's not going to be ideal for those types of fights here. For our front bar set, we're going with Spell Strategist, still one of the strongest sets for raw single target DPS. This is a Cyrodiil set, so you do need to have, I mean, you can just buy this off of Guild Traders. You don't really need access to anything here as a rewards for the worthy set here, compared to Siroria, where you need to be able to farm Vet Cloud Rest plus 1, 2, or 3 for the armor pieces here. We still have double Inferno Staves. So the front bar here we have a Spell Strategist Inferno Staff. I have a Precise Staff with a Flame Damage enchant. You can also go with Infused. The higher your DPS is, the better return you'll have on Precise. So if you are kind of just learning how to DPS, or your DPS is a little bit low, then Infused are going to end up being a little bit stronger for you there. Back bar is still the Maelstrom Inferno Staff infused with a shock damage enchant. You can also go with the weapon damage enchant as well for the additional cleave damage from the weapon damage enchant there. Now, in terms of other sets here, I will be going through these in roughly alphabetical order, so bear with me while I try to find all the sets that I do want to talk about here. Starting off with some dungeon sets. Not too many to speak of here in terms of dungeon sets for Magicka Wardens, but there are a handful. So the first one's going to be Burning Spellweave. Classic set here for Magicka DPS. This comes from City of Ash, so this is a base game set. Now, Magicka Wardens, your only real source of fire damage is going to be Blockade, as well as your flame damage enchant and any procs of burning that you happen to get from that flame damage enchant. It's enough flame damage to get you roughly 55 to 60% uptime burning Spellweave maximum, so it's still pretty nice overall. It is a proc set, so it will carry over to your back bar if you happen to run on the front bar. Definitely a set you want to have on hand. Very, very nice for AoE damage there because of that very strong spell damage bonus that you get from the proc. But beyond that, the only other set that's really worth mentioning is going to be Scathing Mage, and this is mostly for more trash pulls. So the proc condition is very, very specific. It has to be direct damage and it has to be a critical hit. Now, with Magicka Wardens, you do have access to a cleave move that has a lot that deals direct damage. That's your Shulk's ability. So in trash pulls, Scathing Mage does have a pretty good chance to proc here. That being said, the fact that it doesn't have quite as much spell damage as Burning Spellweave, and the fact that the proc condition is pretty specific, it's more specific than Burning Spellweave. Burning Spellweave is typically speaking going to be a little bit better than Scathing Mage. That being said, if you do have a set of Scathing Mage already on hand, then this is a good holdover set while you're farming for your other more powerful sets here. Going over Overland Sets, there are a handful of Overland Sets that are also pretty decent on Magicka Wardens. So starting off from the very beginning here. Spinner's Garment is really nice for trash pulls, especially in fights where you're not going to be able to get, for example, Alkosh on all the ads or even Crusher. While you do have a source of AoE Major Breach through your Shulk's ability, the tanks might not be able to apply Crusher or Alkosh on everything, so having Spinner's Garments just gives you the additional penetration to hit the pen cap there. Only is for trash pulls, not really all that strong for boss fights. Next we have Mother's Sorrow. This comes from the Zaan. Very, very powerful set for Magicka DPS now, especially mainly due to the buff to the Shadow Mundus here. This just adds just raw spell crit. Ideally, you'll be running Mother's Sorrow on the body, but because it is spell crit and you do have a very dynamic rotation, so you're on your front bar quite often, or I should say for a very long period of time, Mother's Sorrow is actually pretty decent to run on the front bar as well. So either a front bar set or a body set, doesn't really matter which one you kind of go for here with Mother's Sorrow. Next we have Necropotence. So Magicka Wardens do run the Bear ultimate. It's pretty much your strongest ultimate, even considering things like Northern Storm on the front bar and maybe like Shooting Star. Necropotence the Bear is still going to be the strongest ultimate for you to use, and it will end up activating Necropotence. So Necropotence just adds straight up max Magicka. Doesn't add any crit, doesn't add additional spell damage, at least not directly. So this just gives you just raw resources. Pretty nice set, very easy to get. It's a base game set. You can farm it, you can buy it, and it provides a very hefty amount of max Magicka, which does impact pretty much all of your abilities, including the Bear, because the Bear is an ultimate, so it does scale off of resources and your spell damage as well. And then there's Crafty Elfique, which I like to call the poor man's Necropotence. So if you are not running the Bear, but you still want to have a lot of max Magicka, Crafty Elfique is the set for you. This comes from Elsweyr, so if you don't have access to Elsweyr, you will have to buy it off Guild Traders. But this is, again, very similar to Necropotence, just raw max Magicka. Other sets like Mother's Sorrow will outperform Crafty Elfique, but if you want to go ahead and farm this set, you have a set available to you from maybe running maybe the Elsweyr dungeons and dells while you're trying to clear all the map or something, then you can definitely run this on a Magicka Warden. Finally, for trial sets, there is one trial set that you definitely want to have on hand as a Magicka Warden, and that's going to be Master Architect. So this comes from Halls of Fabrication, which is in Vvardenfell, so you do need to have access to Vvardenfell in order to grab this set here. So the Bear ultimate costs 75 ultimate, making it one of the cheapest ultimates in the game. Only Soul Harvest and Templar's Empowering Sweeps or Crescent Sweeps are cost less ultimate. So Master Architect is a very, very nice set to go along with the Magicka Warden. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that because Magicka Wardens can wear Master Architect and use Master Architect, plus the fact that the Bear can be activated at range, Magicka Wardens are able to provide Major Slayer via Magic Architect to ranged DPS, and this is particularly nice to have if you have a lot of Magicka DPS to be able to get that additional Major Slayer bonus here. So it kind of fits into this very, very niche role here, but typically speaking, you'll be able to get you'll be able to get Major Slayer from other sets, mainly War Machine on like a Stamina Nightblade or a Stamina Templar perhaps. So if you do need to have a source of ranged Major Slayer though, Magic Architect on the Magicka Warden is pretty much one of the only ways to get that. Next, I do want to mention False God's Devotion here. Very nice set here. So this comes from veteran Sunspire, so you do have access to the Elsweyr expansion to grab this set here. The perfect version comes from Vet Sunspire. It doesn't have to be hard mode. It drops from the non-hard mode versions of the bosses. The normal version of False God's Devotion drops from normal Sunspire. The perfected version is definitely the one that you want to grab though. That's mainly because of that max Magicka bonus on the 5-piece that is not present with the normal version of False God's Devotion. This basically gives False God's Devotion a lot of set armor bonuses, giving it a lot of additional power. The 5-piece is basically the same thing as VO, just for Magicka, so it reduces the cost of your Magicka abilities by 8%, and it restores 2150 Magicka whenever you kill an enemy. So really, really strong sustain set here, and the fact that it has so many armor bonuses and Minor Slayer is really nice on top of that. In addition, because it does reduce the cost of your Magicka abilities, you can also end up running buy-stat food in certain scenarios, depending on how many orbs you're able to get, which would basically give you a little bit more max Magicka, a little bit more max health to play around with. So potentially a very good set to hold on to if you have access to Elsweyr. In terms of Monster Helm sets, there are a handful of Monster Helm sets that you can run instead of Zaan, especially if you do have to play at range. One set that you don't really need is going to be Slimecraw, and that's mainly because Bird of Prey already provides Minor Berserk for you, but if you want to replace Bird of Prey with something like a shield or a self-heal, then you can run Slimecraw instead for the Minor Berserk. So this is only really useful in scenarios where you're not anticipating getting Minor Berserk from your healer or from slotting Bird of Prey. Those instances are going to be pretty small, but a good example of where Slimecraw might be useful is going to be in Asylum, where you might not have the space for Bird of Prey because you are running a self-heal along with a shield as well. From there, another set that you want to have on hand, if you can't get Zaan, because Zaan does require you to have the Dragon Bones DLC because it comes from Scalecaller Peak, the next best melee option is going to be Grothar. This is the base game set from Vaults of Madness, basically an AoE version of Zaan. So even in trash pulls, Grothar is actually pretty nice to have here. So definitely a good set to hold on to if you don't have access to Zaan, as it is the strongest Magicka base game Monster Helm set. Now I do want to point out Iceheart here. The 2-piece is actually pretty nice for progression because it does give you that pretty large shield, but it's mostly used for the 1-piece instead, that additional spell crit. So if you're playing at range, you basically have 3 options here. So the first option, which I already mentioned, is going to be Slimecraw in case you don't have Comet Prayer, good Comet Prayer uptime, or you're not slotting Bird of Prey. The other option is to run Valken Skoria. This is pretty nice because the 1-piece gives you max health, but the 2-piece is pretty weak proc compared to some other sets bonuses, so it's not a particularly strong option. The 1-piece is also doesn't provide any sort of additional DPS because it is max health, and it is, plus it's also a pretty hard set to get because you do need to clear City of Ash 2, which is a fairly difficult dungeon. Your third option is to run 2 1-piece spell crit sets, so those would be 2 different Monster Helm sets, each of them which has 1 spell crit bonus. So that'd be something like Iceheart here, with the spell crit on the 1-piece. Zaan has spell crit on the 1-piece. And then Slimecraw also has spell crit on the 1-piece as well. So if you need to play at range, but you don't want to run Skoria, then you can do something like 1-piece Zaan, 1-piece Iceheart, or 1-piece Iceheart, 1-piece Slimecraw. That way you can get 2 armor bonuses of spell crit, and in this Shadow Mundus era, it's a pretty strong bonus there. So those are kind of your options when it comes to Monster Helm sets. Moving on to our character sheet, I am a Dark Elf. Dark Elves are one of the best races when it comes to Magicka DPS. The true best Magicka DPS race is going to be the High Elves. The High Elves get 2000 max Magicka and 258 additional spell damage. Dark Elves, on the other hand, only get 1875 max Magicka, but they still get the 258 spell damage. Now, Dark Elves get 1875 max stamina and 258 additional weapon damage, so if you want to flip-flop between a Stamina Warden and a Magicka Warden, Dark Elves are a very nice option there for that sort of hybrid DPS. High Elves, on the other hand, they only get additional stamina return whenever they deal damage, so still kind of decent for stamina sustain, but it doesn't give you any sort of raw stats for if you do want a kind of hybrid DPS. Another good race to consider for Magicka DPS would be the Bretons. So the Bretons get 2000 max Magicka, they get 100 Magicka regen, they get a little bit of additional spell resistance, so you get a little bit more beefiness, and they also get 7% cost reduction to their Magicka ability. So basically a very slightly weaker version of the perfected False God's Devotion there. Very similar to False God's Devotion, running a Breton may allow you to run Bisat food. You might need to make a few other changes. So for example, you might want to run an Absorb Magic glyph on the back bar rather than a shock or weapon damage glyph if you're running a Breton, or to fully sustain. But the sustain option with the Breton is there, you just don't have that spell damage bonus, so your overall ceiling, your max damage potential, is going to be a little bit lower on a Breton. For our attributes, we have all points into max Magicka here. You can shift a few points of health if you so desire. It's kind of up to you if you want to do that or not. Just because of the nerf to max health on regen food that happened in Elsweyr, it's a little bit more difficult to get up to a good level of health here, so it might be a good idea to shift some points from Magicka into health if you want to. The amount of health that we have right now, once we have minor toughness up, is acceptable for vet trials. For our Mundus, going with the Shadow Mundus, still the strongest Mundus in the game for DPS, assuming that you have pretty decent crit. So for most builds, Shadow Mundus is going to be the strongest option here. There are a few scenarios where the Thief is going to be stronger than the Shadow, and that's when you have pretty low spell crit. So for example, if you're running something like Necropotence and Spell Strategist, or Siroria and Spell Strategist with an infused front bar, in that instance, Thief does end up winning out over the Shadow by a very small margin, but the Shadow, typically speaking, will out-parse the Thief. We're running regen food, so that is either Clockwork Citrus Fillet or Dubious Camarden Throw. Clockwork Citrus Fillet being the preferred option here because it does give you a little bit more max stats and a little bit more Magicka regen compared to Witchmother's Potent Brew. Those are your two main options. If you're running False God's Devotion or you're a Breton, you might also want to run Bistat food. So that would either be the base game blue food or Double Bloody Mara. The thing with Double Bloody Mara that you want to remember is that it does drop your vampirism down by one stage, so if you are a vampire, just be aware of that when you decide to run Double Bloody Mara. Speaking of vampire, we are a vampire here. We're stage 3, but you only really need to be stage 2 for the 10% additional Magicka regen. Stage 3 gives you that access to the Undeath passive, which reduces the amount of damage you take once you hit 50% health or lower, but going to stage 3 results in taking more fire damage as well, so just keep that in mind if you do end up being a vampire. The sustain is very nice, but you do end up taking more damage from fire and you have less health regen. Moving on to our bars, our front bar here: Screaming Cliff Racer, Deep Fissure, Veteran Infection, Bird of Prey, Inner Lights, and Eternal Guardian. Our back bar: Winter's Revenge, Blockade of Fire, Rearming Trap. You can also substitute this with Channel Acceleration under the Sigic Order skill line if you are not able to be within melee range to get Rearming Trap to proc, so just run Channel Acceleration instead. Blue Betty, we have Bird of Prey again, and then we have Eternal Guardian. So if you need to swap out any ability here for a shield, you can swap out Bird of Prey on the back bar for a shield here. I probably would try to avoid swapping out the Bird of Prey on the front bar, just because you will be on your front bar for a large amount of time, and you do want that Minor Berserk buff because it is a really nice boost to your overall DPS. Moving on to our CP points. The CP cap is still, I should say, 810, so it hasn't changed at all between Wrathstone and Elsweyr. It gives us 270 points to put across each of our different constellations. Starting off with green CPs, we have 100 Arcanist and 75 into Tenacity, which leaves 95 remaining points. We have 31 Shadow Ward, 31 Tumbling, and 33 Warlord. Now you can shift a few points around here in the green CP, so you can drop Arcanist down to 75 to get 25 more points back. You can also bring Tenacity up to 100 to get that last percentage point, so you do have some flexibility with green CPs. For our blue CPs, this particular setup assumes that you have access to all the debuffs in the game, so that would be Torog's Infused Crusher, Alkash, Major Breach, Minor Breach. If you don't anticipate getting very good debuff uptimes, or you you're missing a couple of debuffs, you'll need to shift a few points into Spell Erosion. So if you do need to do that, you can drop some points out of the other nodes. So Elfborn, I have 72, 64 in Ellie Expert, 12 into Spell Erosion, 13 Staff Expert, 72 Master at Arms, and 37 into Thaumaturge. Now if you need to drop a few points out, you can drop Thaumaturge down to either 34 or 31, those are the next two jump points. Master at Arms can be dropped down to 66. You still want to have 75 points here for the Butcher passive, so I would not drop this below 66. Staff X can be dropped to, I believe it is either 12 or 9, or 2 jump points that I know of. Ellie Expert can be dropped down to 56, I probably would not drop down to 49. And Elfborn can be dropped down to either 66 or 61. That should give you plenty of points to play around with, or to put into Spell Erosion. And finally, our red CP. So this is a very generalist approach. If you want to maximize your mitigation in any single trial, for example, Therian Archive or Hall's Fabrication, you will need to shift some CP points around because you will be taking specific damage types in specific trials. So I have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick-Skinned, and 64 in both Hardy and Elemental Defender. Alright, so that's pretty much all the build information, so now we can go ahead and talk about the rotation. So I kind of alluded to this earlier in the video, but Magicka Wardens probably have one of the most complex rotations in the game. It's really centered, but while I do say it is the most complex, it's actually fairly simple if you kind of break it down, and the core behind the rotation is Deep Fissure, also known as Shocks. This has a 3-second more or less cooldown, you can think of it. So when you use Deep Fissure, after 3 seconds, it will finally pop up and deal its damage, and that gives you enough time to do 2 abilities before it pops up and does damage. So for example, I'm just going to use Bird of Prey here because I don't want to pull anything, but if you do Shocks and you do 2 abilities, you can see that Shocks comes up pretty much as you're ending that second ability. So that's kind of the whole idea behind the rotation. Center it around Deep Fissure. So you're always going to do Deep Fissure and then 2 abilities, Deep Fissure and then 2 abilities, and so on and so forth. Now, your abilities have different durations. So for example, Fetcher Infection lasts for 10 seconds. Winter's Revenge lasts for 12, Blockade lasts for 8, Rearming Trap lasts for, I believe it lasts for 12 as well, and Blue Betty lasts for 27 seconds. So a lot of different variations when it comes to your overall duration. So the idea behind this is pick up a sort of cooldown kind of countdown, something like Action Duration Reminder or Srendar. A couple of the UI add-ons also have their own sort of buff trackers here, and just keep an eye on the cooldowns of your dots. So you basically want to do Shocks, and then you want to re-up any dots that are going to fall off, and if you don't have dots that are going to fall off, then you would just use Screaming Cliff Racer instead. So that's the general idea behind the whole rotation. So it does end up being fairly complex. So when we do a 21 million dummy parse here, we will kind of see just how complex the rotation is. So it is very, very dynamic. There is no static component behind this at all. So there's really no rotation to really write down. It's pretty much going to be Shocks, 2 abilities, Shocks, 2 abilities. If there's a dot that needs to be refreshed, then refresh the dot. If there is no dot that needs to be refreshed, then just do Screaming Cliff Racer instead. And abilities do also count ultimates, so if you decide to use the Bear ultimate, that does count as 1 ability for your 2 abilities between Shock casts. So here we are with a 200 million dummy, and we're going to go ahead and do a full parse here. So this dummy basically gives us pretty much all the raid buffs and debuffs you can think of in the game. The sole exception would be Major Vulnerability. So if you want to compare this parse to other Magicka DPS, you certainly can do so. However, you will not necessarily be able to compare this to the Magicka Necromancer, because Magicka Necromancers do have access to Major Vulnerability, which is not present in on other classes. So if you want to compare to the Magicka Necromancer, just be mindful you will need to shift the Magicka Necromancer parse down in order to account for the Major Vulnerability. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here with the parse. I always like to pre-buff every single fight with Blue Betty and Rearming Trap, or Channel Acceleration, whichever one you end up using, and then again, go right into the rotation. We're going to start off with our back bar dots, and then we're going to go straight into the front bar and do that rotation I mentioned earlier, which is Shocks, 2 abilities, Shocks, 2 abilities, and so on and so forth. So here we go. Let's get started. So Action Duration Reminder is bugged on Fetcher Infection, so it's not really showing up Fetcher Infection correctly here. See here, I don't need to re-up any dots. So if I don't need to do any dots, then I'll just do Screaming Cliff Racer instead. Now you will see here that this does end up having a little bit of downtime on some of your dots, and that's just the natural case here because you have a lot of different duration dots to line up. The most common one that you'll have downtime on is going to be Fetcher Infection. Probably the most important dot to make sure you don't have too much downtime on is going to be Blockade, especially if you are running that Maelstrom backbar. You can see here we don't have any dots to really refresh, so we're just going to do our Cliff Racer here. You can see here it's pretty similar to the Magicka Nightblade Parse, so if you're just moving over from a Magicka Nightblade or you already play a Magicka Nightblade, this rotation is going to be fairly simple for you to pick up. It's not obviously exactly the same as a Magicka Nightblade, but the concept is still there, where you're kind of centering it around a certain ability. Definitely feels like I'm missing a few weaves here because my parse is a little bit lower than the one I did earlier. So I do have the earlier parse saved up, so if this does end up being a little bit lower than normal, I can show you a more, I should say, average parse for me. Nothing changes at all in Execute. The bear does deal more damage in Execute, so that's a 25% here. Because it's an ultimate and not a spam bowl, there's not much we can do. Bear is also not affected by Bloodthirsty as far as I'm aware. No common pet is affected by Bloodthirsty, and that does include the Necromancer pets. So if you want to run something like Infused or Chain for Jewelry instead, that's perfectly fine to do on a Magicka Warden. Yes, this price is a little bit lower than normal. So I will show you guys this parse here, which ended up being 77.6k, but the earlier parse that I did was 80.5k here. So this is a little bit more realistic. I usually hit around 80 to 81k on a Magicka Warden here on a trial dummy, running Siroria and Spell Strategist here. I think the main reason this parse was so low, is because my weaving was not quite on point for this parse here. But you see here, Deep Fissure is actually a very strong move overall. It has very strong burst potential here, as does Screaming Cliff Racer. Now, Screaming Cliff Racer does do more damage the further back you are, so if you were to play at the maximum range you can play at, which is 18 meters, because of the blockade 18 meter distance, then Screaming Cliff Racer will deal a little bit more damage here. I believe it deals about 15% more damage once you're at maximum range, so you'll probably see about 3k or so increase in the average hit, probably close to around, yeah, it's about 10% because you're not quite at that full range of Screaming Cliff Racer that way. Now, the bear itself actually does quite a bit of damage, so Swipe and Crushing Swipes are its normal attacks, so that combined deals about 11.5% damage here, so it actually ends up being a number 3 here just from its passive attacks. The ultimate itself is very, very strong, so very powerful here. The max hit is 141.7k, so very powerful ultimate here. If we want to add that on to the bear ultimate, then we're sitting at 3 plus 15.3k, so that'd be up there with Deep Fissure overall if you want to include the ultimate with the bear DPS as well. So overall, Magicka Wardens, a bit of a weaker Magicka DPS class. Again, the only class that is really doing worse than Magicka Wardens are going to be the Magicka Necromancers, but it does sort of fill in that niche role where if you need to give Major Slayer to your ranged DPS, then Magicka Warden is pretty much your only option there. So that is it for this build video. Hopefully you guys found this informative. If you guys have any questions about the build itself, please feel free to leave down in the comment section below and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.